Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I am Savannah Hawkins, and I'm so excited to talk with you about a topic I am very passionate about. This is a topic and an issue that is seen globally, internationally, across all seas and borders, but also a prevalent issue right here in the United States. This issue is the gender gap. Now, what is the gender gap, you may be thinking? Well, the gender gap is going to be the differences in opportunities and status offered to differing genders. In today's presentation, I'll be covering three things. The first of which being how the gender gap is seen in business in other countries, how this gender gap is seen right here in the United States, and some of the circumstances that are adding to the gender gap. Let's start by seeing some of the gender gap that exists globally. The World Economic Forum created the Global Gender Gap Report, which ranks all 153 nations total from 1 to 153. 1 being the country with the least amount of gender inequality, and 153 being the country which has the max amount of gender inequality. Now, from the Global Gender Gap Report, we can find that the smallest gender gap is seen in Eastern European countries. These are going to be countries like Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Norway, but closely followed by these Eastern European countries and their surrounding areas is North America, which features countries like Canada and the United States. But I don't want to let these statistics fool you. Just because a nation is ranked well doesn't mean that the gender gap doesn't exist there. It simply means that it's just less extreme than in other nations. From this same Global Gender Gap Report, we can see that the biggest gender gap exists in Asia. Let's look at India, for example. According to a CNN business article that was posted in December of 2019, just a few short months ago, only 25% of women in India are included in their workforce. And of the 25% that are actually working, they're only making a fifth of an Indian man's income. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, of course the gender gap is bigger in underdeveloped countries. But that is simply untrue. The rate of development doesn't often play a critical role into whether or not a gender gap exists. We see highly developed countries, such as Japan and South Korea, that don't rank very well on this report. Japan is sitting at 144 out of 153 total, and South Korea isn't very far off, sitting at 127 of the 153 total. So now that we know that the rate of development of a nation does not play a vital role, let's consider the gender gap in the United States, a highly developed nation. We can see the gender gap prevalent in many aspects in business. However, I would like to focus on two: the industry gap and the wage gap. Let's start by taking a look at the industry gap. We see women bound to certain types of careers that are deemed fitting for women. Oftentimes we see women dominating fields such as wait staff at a restaurant, or teachers, or nurses. But why is it that we don't see women in positions of power and it's not accepted? Why aren't women CEOs or doctors themselves? We see a large lack of women representing top leaders in businesses. According to CNBC and Fortune.com, in 2018, only 24 of the Fortune 500 companies were ran by female CEOs. That accumulates to only a whopping 4.8%. 4.8% of the Fortune 500 companies are ran by female CEOs. Now, let's look at the gender wage gap across the United States. According to the Center for American Progress, nationally, women make 82 cents to each full dollar that men make. And according to inequality.org, women make less than men on average in every single industry. And you know what industry sees the biggest wage gap? Management positions. Inequality.org goes on to say that in 2016, men in management made an average of $88,000 a year. And women in those same positions only made $55,000 a year. Now, this is where it becomes extremely relevant to me. A young woman pursuing a management career, nearly finished with her management major, an American Eagle assistant store manager, looking to move up ranks and become a CEO one day myself. And I stand here and wonder, what makes me worth less than a man? The fact that I'm a woman? A major argument presented on why the gender gap exists is the theory that women have less control over their emotions than men do. Well, you ever heard of emotional intelligence? Sure you have, because we've spent plenty of time covering it in this course alone. Emotional intelligence is the ability to identify and manage your own emotions. Through this course, we have learned how to perform emotional awareness and then take steps into action of how to perform emotional regulation. These skills and techniques have seen just as much success in women as they have in men. In fact, emotional intelligence isn't even something we're born with, but something that we learn that is continually developed over time. So with that being the case, no man is born with any more emotional intelligence than any woman. So that starts us at an equal playing field for developing our emotional intelligence. Both genders have the ability to develop their emotional intelligence to the full extent. Now, whether they do or not is on an individual basis and should not become a generalization of an entire gender. Now, based on this information, the myth that women have very little control over their emotions can simply be debunked. If we all develop our emotional intelligence to the same level, why would I, as a woman, have less control over my emotions than a man would? I wouldn't, which makes me just as qualified as a woman to be the leader of these big organizations. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about some of the societal standards which are affecting women in business right here in the United States and contributing to that gender gap. As all of us know, there's a societal pressure for women to produce and raise children, which is another common excuse as to why women can't hold positions of leadership in businesses. Many companies believe that they shouldn't waste time and money investing in training and appointing women into positions of power because they think that they'll simply leave when they're ready to start a family. The social responsibility of women to raise children over men is irrational. Why should a woman who is the primary breadwinner for her and her husband have to give up her successful career just to raise children? Gender should be able to achieve the same work-life balance without societal pressures getting in the way. The cultural norm of men financially supporting the family and women raising the family and children is adapting, as many families today are seeing reversed roles. In fact, my family growing up was one of those. My mother was the primary breadwinner, holding a management position of power in a company, and my father stepped in to raise the kids. I believe that this is something that will become much more common as women increase their role in the workforce. So we have now covered what some of the gender gaps look like in business in other countries, what those gaps look like right here in the United States, and some of the circumstances that are contributing to those gaps. I'd like to thank you again for joining me and listening to me talk so passionately about a topic that is really important to me. I hope you leave here today with a wider outlook of how women are facing discrimination based on gender. And I hope you leave here today feeling inspired to fight for the equality of women, because I will be for the rest of my life.